Yeah, that's true. They were hungry, so they were willing to do whatever. Yes.
Well, the fact that he treated Benjamin so much better kind of gave them what to think about when they were going home. But there's still the price to pay for crossing there. So it's really as good as it sounds.
Yeah. All right, let's go to John 11. And Ken's going to read that for us in the New Testament.
Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus was now sick, was one and the same who poured perfume on the Lord, and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed there where he was 2 days more. Then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble. By night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. But Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. On his arrival, Jesus found Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection of the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but still was at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, He was deeply moved, and his spirit was troubled. Where have you laid him? He said. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not have he opened the eyes of the blind man and kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, and he has been there 4 days. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped in strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take both our place and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was a high priest at that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. Do you not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish? He did not say this on his own, but as a high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, what do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all? But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so they might arrest him.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Anything we learn about God in this passage other than Jesus is God? He has power over the grave.
Well, God and Jesus in America said things the easy way. You know, he walked in while he was sick, and said, rise, you know, they would say, well, he was healed. But this man was dead for 4 days, and he was able to make it out. That's a miracle that no one could have.
Right. Typically, people were buried the day, or really quickly, the day of their death. We learn anything about people in this passage?
It's amazing how people can see the miracles of God.
They needed to believe in Jesus, and Jesus
And think that
waited just so that they might believe,
Yeah.
show God's glory.
It's interesting that as I was reading this passage, I was reminded, look at the Jewish leaders. They said, this guy is performing miracles. They believed that he was, but they didn't like it. So they were plotting against him because they did not want to lose their power and their authority. I've often said that power is very intoxicating, very controlling. And so here's the leaders of the nation who didn't really care about anything except their own power and their own well-being. Of course, AD 70, they lost it anyway.
Right.
And they did.
Yeah, just another reminder that God's in control.
That when he said, Lazarus, come out, we were in Lubbock when we lived there, and I was going to school. We went to hear Marshall Keeble preach, and a lot of people from the various congregations, they let out all the congregations that Sunday night to hear him. And he had that as part of his sermon. He said that if he hadn't have said Lazarus come out and just said come out, he said everybody in the graveyard would have come out. I've always remembered that.
Yeah. Yeah, and someday he will.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great day coming.
Yes. Yes.
They came to be comfort to Mary and Martha. And the only way they had to get from place to place was a foot, and they lived 2 miles. And I wonder if I were back then, I guess if that's your norm, you don't think anything about it, but to walk 2 miles a day to somebody's house,
Yeah.
you know, that's
It's a long,
it's a
long way.
Kevin, can you repeat what is said? Can't hardly hear that.
Well, she was talking about the ladies coming from 2 miles away. That is a long distance to go.
Walk.
They were so excited to see Jesus, though, when he came.
Mhm.
And he's teaching them what it means about the power of God, to understand what resurrection means, to help them realize that death is not the enemy that it used to be once Jesus comes and is able to raise people from the dead, that he has the power to do miracles and raise people to life. And of course, Jesus uses that phrase that, oh, he's just fallen asleep. And they thought he was talking about just taking a nap instead of talking about that he was dead. And Jesus has so much power over death that is not a big thing for him to fear, because he has the power.
Mhm.
And so he told them plainly in verse 14, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. And so he was able to show he has the power over death. Of course, they, like everybody, said, well, Jesus, if you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. Well, it did bring him back to life and said your brother will live again. And that's the reason why Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And of course, he tells them, believe in me. Those who believe in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And I think that is something for us to think about. They were weeping. We had weeping in the Old Testament passage. We have weeping here. John, you must have a question. John or Vicky?
Just actually a comment I wanted to tack on to something Ken was talking about there. I think it's interesting that they admit that he's performing many signs, and it's very parallel to the way we are today. So what's that old phrase, nothing new under the sun? If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place in our nation. This is a small group of people that starts with this assigning their beliefs as fact and convincing one another. And then from there, they're going to convince more and more until we get to a day where the entire nation begins to believe this, or at least a large preponderance, and the hysteria takes over and they decide to crucify him. I just think it's interesting that it was a small group here of the chief priest and the Pharisees, because when it says some of them went to the Pharisees. And so I just think it's interesting that it's a small group of people that starts hysteria, not unlike today, yesterday, the day before, and probably the day after.
Right.
If we're not careful, hysteria can take over. And that's kind of a scary thing to think about. Anyway, I was thinking about what Ken said, and it just really struck me.
Many times we pray about something that didn't happen. The time it didn't. And they've been asking the Lord to come out and heal Lazarus because he's sick. And evidently they were pretty close because Jesus, they were well enough to know that. So, but he didn't go up there. He waited.
Can't really understand.
And he waited till Lazarus died before he decided to go. I know people, you know people.
No one should
understand. God really, if he really does, because
Oh, that's
he
what
could
it
have come up.
is. Yeah,
And
that's true.
Mary was saying, Lord, if you had come up here, you could have saved him. Okay? He'd been all right, but you didn't. Okay, so now what? Okay, you ever been there?
Yeah.
And something that happened. Now what I do, Lord, okay, because you missed your chance, all right?
Yeah.
And then he said, even if he's dead, I can reach in there. You can't get where God can't reach you.
Right.
I always thought I'd hate to die drowning because, how's he gonna know where you are? But he knows where you are. He knows all about your problems, and he's able to touch you wherever you are.
Right.
But if it doesn't happen the way I want it to, then I start wondering, just like they did. Now he's gonna pray, well, we'll bring him back. He's dead, you can't bring him back, he's dead. So we limit God's power to work in our lives, just like they did. And that's a no-no. Boy, you let God do whatever he wants to do, because he knows best for the season. And I do, but whatever.
Yeah. You're also saying don't let distance and things or delay affect your faith, because Jesus can do anything, even after someone dies. So